Should we, do you want to put the webinar in start mode? Oh, yeah. Never mind.
Good morning to those who are gathering. We'll just give it a few minutes, make sure folks have a chance to get here. That's also good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Well, happy Thursday, everybody. I think maybe we can go ahead and get started, and I'm sure some folks will gather while we do our morning housekeeping. Welcome to day 4 of Samvera Connect. My name is Kevin Kochansky, and I'm part of the Connect committee, and I will just be kind of moving things along for us today. A little bit of housekeeping. Please note that this webinar has live closed captioning available. Simply click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of the Zoom window. This conference is being recorded. We'll post the full day as soon as we can. I saw that Heather has everything up to yesterday posted already. Great job. Next week, we're going to have those edited to individual video sessions so that it'll be easier to share out specific talks. We've got a Q&A function in Zoom for typing questions for the presenters, and the raise hand feature if you'd like to be unmuted to ask a question. Our Connect Slack channel is the place to be this week for conversation with other attendees and for follow-up with presenters. If you need access to the Samvera Slack workspace, there is a link on the Connect Sched where you can request access. We also have a hashtag for Twitter users, and that's hashtag Samvera 2022. Today's plenary session will run for 2.5 hours with a 10-minute break after 70 minutes. That'll be at 12:10 Eastern time. And there's the Sched link to make sure that you've got the timing right for the presentations. After our plenary sessions, you'll have an option to join a 30-minute Zoom meeting-based Birds of a Feather conversation group. Access information for these sessions can be found in Sched. At 1:30 Eastern or 10:30 Pacific, you can choose between 2 sessions that are available. And at 2 p.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Pacific, there are 3 sessions to choose from. Everybody who registered for Connect agreed to follow our community guidelines and code of conduct. The Samvera community guidelines express our values in the context of everyday activities of the Samvera community, and they serve as the principles by which our members act and collaborate. They complement the code of conduct and the anti-harassment policy. The code of conduct expresses our expectations for respective communication as we work and interact with one another. If you haven't already, please take time to review those documents today. We expect participants at all community events and forums to honor those standards. Building on the framework provided by these documents, each Samvera community member has a role to play in creating and promoting a welcoming and safe community. If a situation arises that may represent a violation of our code of conduct or anti-harassment policy, and you feel you cannot or should not address it alone, please contact a member of this year's program committee, a member of the Samvera board, or a helper. We are well positioned to and prepared to assist you. Helpers for today are Carolyn and Heather, and you can reach them on Slack by direct message or send an email to helpers@samvera.org. And there's more information on our wiki on how to report a conduct violation. And with that, we're almost ready to get started. We are a couple minutes early, so let's make sure that we have a decent amount of folks here, and then maybe we can begin a few seconds early. Jill, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to stop sharing.
So my name is Jill. I'm one of the project managers at Software Services, and I'd done a little bit of research on productivity and focus methods, mostly for myself, just because it's a good skill to have in today's age, and I thought it would be a cool topic to share. So everyone's probably has a general idea of what productivity and focus is, but to put a clear definition on them, focus is how one concentrates on a task at hand, and productivity is the efficiency of the work being done. Obviously, these are super important when it comes to work. If we can't focus, we can't be productive, and our work won't get done. I'm sure everybody's had those days where you just can't seem to get anything done, and you welcome pretty much any little distraction because it's way more exciting than getting your work done. But then think about those times when you are able to focus and you get into kind of a flow, nothing's distracting you, and you're ticking task after task off of your list. You feel super productive. So I'm hoping this presentation will give you some tips and tricks to get into that flow as often as possible. But first, it's important to understand why it's hard to focus. There's a lot of reasons for this. Some of the most common reasons are distractions, lifestyle habits, and trouble organizing and planning what needs to be done. And on top of that, focusing is a skill. It needs to be trained in order to get better at. And the more you use it, the better we get at it. So distractions are a big reason for trouble focusing. It's important that I first explain that there's two different types of focus. There's top-down selective attention, which is intentional and goal-driven focus. You choose a task to focus on and then you do it. And then there's bottom-up selective attention, which is our brain reacting to a stimulus. So, for example, we're working on something and then we see a Slack notification pop up on our screen and we decide to stop what we're working on and open that message and check it. So it's an involuntary type of focus, and it's often triggered by our distractions. You can probably already tell that the bottom-up selective attention can be a productivity killer, so it's important to limit it as much as possible. This can be hard as we live in a very distracting world. Just seeing our emails or Slack open or our phones can distract us from what we want to work on. On top of that, when we do try to focus on a task and it starts to get even remotely difficult, our brains welcome any sort of distraction as a way to escape the discomfort. So then you're in this constant struggle of diverting your attention from what you want to do to the distraction and trying to reorient yourself with the task at hand. You're wasting so much time trying to get back to the task that you're not being your most productive self. Good news though, there's a way to cope with distractions. Most obvious being limiting your distractions. There's tools out there that can block distracting apps and websites, and there's settings on your phone and apps like Freedom and Cold Turkey Blocker that can help with that. You can also turn off notifications during the times you want to get deep focus times. A tip I found during my research that I love was to set specific times to look at emails and Slack notifications and all that, and reply to them during that time. Obviously, it's important to be available for urgent messages, but getting in the habit of not mindlessly checking these can save so much mental capacity for the tasks you actually want to complete. If your phone's a huge distraction, there's a psychology tip that has you place your phone 20 seconds away from where you're working. The idea is that your brain will not want to waste a 20-second journey to do a mindless scroll or look at your phone. And thus you'll start to look at it less and eventually not be conditioned to want to look at it or even think about it while you're in your focus periods. Another cool tip I found was to create a distractions list. The idea is to have a pen and paper handy and use it as a brain dumping station. Anytime you think of something you want to do or think about later that's unrelated to the task you're working on or trying to focus on, you write it down. And writing it down will make sure you can get back to it later, while also not opening a can of worms by using technology to save it for later. Another tip that seems so simple, but I've found to be super effective, is to make your workspace comfortable and clutter-free. If you have a space planned out to effectively get work done and it's clutter-free, you'll spend less time setting up a distraction-free workspace and can jump right into your focus periods. So I like to spend a few minutes after work cleaning up and prepping my space for the next day so I can just jump into my focus period the next day. And then the last tip I found to be helpful is working near productive people. It can be a way to divert the effect of distractions. Seeing others being productive can be enough motivation to be productive yourself. Lifestyle is another contributor to trouble focusing. And I'm sure everybody's heard by now that a healthy lifestyle promotes a healthy brain. And lifestyle habits are a pretty broad topic and unique to each person. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to briefly cover nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Poor nutrition can actually make it hard to focus, plan, and remember things. And an unhealthy diet can cause the body to create more stress hormones, which when activated constantly can lead to inflammation in areas of the brain associated with focusing, remembering things, and planning. Studies have shown that eating foods with omega-3 fats and avoiding foods with lots of sugars, artificial sweeteners, and trans fats can help protect your brain against this inflammation. As for exercising, it's been shown to increase energy levels, release endorphins, and increase blood flow throughout the body, which leads to better functioning of the brain, especially in the areas dealing with your mood, memorization, and focus. And last but not least, and probably the most important of these three, is sleep. The average adult needs 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep each night to help your brain and body repair itself, refresh itself, and feel alert again. Lack of sleep impairs your thinking, thus it'll be hard to focus. Organization, planning, and prioritizing your ideas, to-dos, and time are a huge component of being able to focus and be productive. Excuse me. Not having a clear plan on what to work on, in what order, and when can lead to feeling overwhelmed, which makes it even harder to stay focused because your attention will be jumping between tasks. That may feel productive, but actually wastes a lot of time as you're constantly reorienting yourself to tasks. For the most part, monotasking is the most efficient way to work, in which you focus on one task at a time. This can be to completion or for a designated amount of time. And so for the next slides, I'm going to go over different workflows that can help with focus in general, monotasking, organizing, planning, and prioritizing your to-dos. We'll start off with some techniques to improve your focus. The most common one, and the one you all probably heard of at some point, is the Pomodoro technique. You basically work in intervals, and it's often suggested that it's 25 minutes of focus time followed by a 5-minute break. The break is important as it gives your brain a chance to recharge and come back ready to focus again. After a couple intervals, it's important to take a long break. So I mentioned focus is a skill that you can build on, and the beauty of an interval focus technique is that you can customize it to what your brain needs and can handle. So you don't have to stick to the 25 minutes on and 5 minutes off pattern. You can maybe start there and add 5 minutes to the focus period each week as your skills improve. It's important to keep these focus periods just long enough to retain focus, but also challenge your brain so that you can keep honing in on your focusing skill. Another thing to note here is that this technique is great for pretty much any kind of work. If you have lots of tiny tasks, you can knock out as many as you can in your workflows. And if you have a large task or a project to do, you can break it down into smaller chunks and designate one focus period at a time for each chunk. If you like the idea of working at intervals like the Pomodoro technique, but want a little spicier routine, you can try the 28-2 rule. It's 30-minute intervals, but for 20 minutes you sit, 8 minutes you stand, and 2 minutes you do some sort of movement. It ensures you aren't sitting all day and keep the blood flowing. This is where an adjustable desk could be pretty handy. And similar to the Pomodoro technique, this technique is great for all types of work. Now, if you have problems just starting work or procrastinating on items, the 2-minute rule might be perfect for you. The concept is simple. If a task takes 2 minutes or less to do, you just do it then. It usually takes more time to add it to your to-do list and grab the mental capacity later to do it than it does to just take care of it right then and there. I want to point out that this is a tool for your small miscellaneous tasks, like replying to a quick email, scheduling meetings, or making a quick edit to your document. This can be helpful for those who like to procrastinate or have trouble starting work, as it gives you easy wins. Your brain feels rewarded when you cross things off your to-do list, so starting your work with a couple things crossed off can be enough motivation to maintain your focus for the more difficult tasks. The next items are going to kind of outline how you can organize and prioritize your tasks to ensure your focus time is just focus time on the tasks. The first method is the getting things done, and it's super effective for those with really long lists of to-dos. Essentially, there's 5 steps, as you can see outlined. The first step helps you identify everything you need to accomplish that you can think of, big projects, small tasks, and everything else. Think of it as like a hodgepodge of thoughts in a brain dumping station. The goal is to write down anything you can think of as it comes to you so you don't lose it. And I highly recommend the pen and paper brain dump technique I talked about earlier for this. The next step is to actually dive into each piece you wrote down on your list. What is it? An action item, a project, trash? Do you need to break it down into smaller pieces to become actionable? If yes, then do it. And if it's not actionable, then it doesn't require your focus. Once you've identified it, you can move on to the next step, organizing it into a category. Your categories are tailored to what you need. For example, you could organize them by project or skill set or focus within each project. It's essentially what makes sense for you, and you might have to do a little trial and error to figure that out. The reflecting portion is simply maintaining the list, updating it, and making sure everything continues to flow correctly. Most sources suggest doing this at least once a week, but I found it more useful to spend a couple minutes a day, whether at the beginning or end, to maintain it. And the last step is to actually do the tasks. This method does not specify how you engage with the tasks, so it can reflect what makes sense to you. You can use the Pomodoro technique to try to knock out a category at a time, or knock out one item from each category at a time. But having that organized and categorized list of actionable items offers clarity and control over your day, as you have a clear pathway of execution. The next method is called task batching. The first step is once again listing the tasks you need to complete. And again, the tasks can be anything: big projects, small action items, anything you need to do. From there, you look at each task on your list and break it down into the most atomic process, aka tasks within the task. You want every item on that list to be an action item, not an overarching task with an ambiguous process. One of the best ways I found for me to break things down into their most atomic form is to create a brain dump of every step that could be involved in that overarching task. If I'm struggling and thinking of these, then I know I probably need to do more research to get familiar with the goals and processes involved in accomplishing that task. So then I'll make that task become a research task and outline what I'm trying to get out of that research. And then I make note to create actionable steps from that. Once I have all my action items, I then categorize them. And again, this is how you want to categorize them: project, skill set, focus within a project, whatever makes sense to you. From there, you can organize your schedule by categories. And Google Calendar is great for this because you can block off times and label them, so you have an accurate forecast of what and when you want your category focus times to be. During that category's designated time, the goal is to cross off as many items from that list as possible. This helps you limit the amount of time you spend on a project or category, making sure you can give attention elsewhere. It also helps prevent multitasking and switching back and forth between projects, which helps with the ability to focus, as you won't spend time acclimating to different mindsets or environments associated with the different projects. Time blocking is essentially how it sounds. You divide your day into specific blocks of time. You follow the same first two steps as task batching, listing your tasks and breaking them down into actionable steps. But from there, you assign each task to a block of time. This method has aspects of the Pomodoro method, however, it gives each block of time an intention and more clarity. It also helps you to set boundaries within your workday, so you can allocate your time to everything you need to focus on, instead of getting sucked into one task and taking the whole day to complete it. So this method can be really great for those with big projects and give you a sense of clarity on how to accomplish them. And then you also get that sense of accomplishment as you go through each time block. Time boxing is very similar to time blocking, but it's a lot more rigid. It makes you evaluate how much time you actually want to spend on a task and hold yourself accountable. Like time blocking, the concept is to designate a focus period for a specific task or project. However, the time you designated for this is the only amount of time allowed to complete it. So if it doesn't get done in those designated focus periods, it doesn't get done at all. It definitely creates a sense of pressure. So for those who need a deadline to be their motivator to focus, this is a great one for that. This is also a great method for perfectionists. Because of the rigid timeline, it helps you focus on completing what's within the scope of an item rather than trying to make it perfect. Because if you have at least covered what's within scope, then you can call the item done. And trying to reach perfection can lead to scope creep, which actually keeps you from being able to focus on your other tasks. The next three methods I'm going to talk about are ones that can help you prioritize your tasks. And the first one I'll talk about is the Ivy Lee method. And this method is super simple. The day before, you list out your 6 most important tasks that need to be completed. Then the next day, you start working through them one by one. You don't start the next one until you've completed the one before. And anything that does not get completed that day gets moved to the next day's list. And some guidelines I've used to figure out if a task is important are asking myself a couple questions. Is it related to my goals? Will it make other items on my to-do list obsolete, faster, or easier? And have I been putting it off for too long? Eat the frog is the next method. As I mentioned earlier, it's best to complete your most dreaded and difficult tasks at the beginning of your day, because that is when your ability to focus is at its highest. But Eat the Frog helps you determine what those tasks are by asking yourself, what do I need to do but don't want to do? And usually the answer to that is what you should work on first. If there's ever multiple answers to that question, the advice is to complete the biggest one or the one that will take the longest first. The Eisenhower decision matrix is a more granular approach for figuring out where a task lies in your list of priorities. You simply go through your tasks, asking which category it belongs to. Urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, not urgent and not important. According to those answers, you can determine if the task needs to be completed immediately, scheduled for later, delegated to others, or eliminated altogether. A tip for determining a task that is urgent is to look at if it needs to be completed by an upcoming deadline. Otherwise, there will be a consequence. Examples could be finishing a project with a last-minute deadline or handling an urgent client request. And again, if there are multiple tasks in each category, the bigger and longer to complete tasks usually take priority. And those are all the tips and tricks I have for you guys. I can open it up for questions.
We're running a little early, so we have time for some questions. And I see some good recommendations inspired by this talk coming in the Slack channel as well.
Ooh.
I have a question, Jill. Is there anything you've tried that just didn't work for you?
As far as methods, I've found that the time blocking hasn't been my favorite. It's not to say that I haven't used it, but yeah, the time blocking hasn't been my favorite thus far.
Oh, Amanda.
Hi, I just want to say thank you, Joe. I really needed to hear this talk today. I've been struggling with focus lately. And I was curious, in any of your research, did you come across any tips and tricks for how to work in meeting time and also stay productive? Like, is there a better time of day for meetings, or, how can you structure your day the best to focus on things that need to get done, but also meet with your colleagues as needed?
Yeah, pretty much the time blocking, time boxing, those kind of methods would be perfect, where you can actually write out your schedule for the day. I've noticed actually putting in my meeting times and then scheduling the rest of my parts with like the task batching and all that has helped me to stay productive even in between meetings. Whenever you have like those 30-minute blocks in between, it just helps you give clarity as to what you should be working on in those times in between the meetings.
Well, thank you, Jill. Jill is one of the newer members of our SoftServe team. We're really happy to have her. This is her first Connect. So thanks for sharing that. She shared that with our larger company a couple weeks ago, and it was really appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Up next, we've got some lightning talks. We've got James Griffin, Julie Hardesty, and John Cameron. We have a 40-minute slot for this, and I know your talks are probably short. So if you were up last night cutting out that interpretive dance sequence, put on your ballet shoes because we've got time for it. I think first up is probably James.
Thank you. Hello everyone. My name is James Griffin. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a research data infrastructure developer within the Princeton University Library. And my lightning talk today is going to address the topic of active Fedora, Rails, and linked data. So in order to try and address this succinctly, I wanted to first provide an overview of linked data and the resource description framework. So to provide everything in context, linked data is basically a very broad subject. There are entire conferences dedicated to this topic, but essentially what linked data tries to achieve is it tries to provide a model for, or a paradigm for ensuring that elements of data sets and elements of sets of metadata, so fields and attribute values, can be assigned sort of URLs for these actual data elements, URIs, Uniform Resource Identifiers. These are comparable to URLs, but they don't actually point to locations on the World Wide Web, which are normally resolved using the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP.
James, can
yes.
I just interrupt for a second? Some folks are saying that it's hard to hear you. I can hear you fine, but I've got some headphones on. If you have any way that you can pull a mic closer, I think that might be.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me see here. I can. Raise my volume. Okay, hopefully I'm more audible now. I apologize.
Thanks, James.
You're welcome. Sorry again. Yes, so linked data and the RDF basically seek to achieve using these URIs to express, to give unique identifiers to elements of data sets, as well as to provide URIs for encoding the relationships between different data sets. So a very common practice one would find would be, say, there's a URI for a collection in the abstract, say like a collection digital object, and then there's a URI for each member of a collection, say 3 different book objects. And there will also be a URI encoding the collection membership relationship. So basically, you're just constructing a network of different interrelated data points that use these URIs to build what are essentially knowledge graphs, undirected acyclic knowledge graphs, which can then be queried and updated in much the same manner that one would use relational databases. And the specific technology specification that can be used to implement linked data that is used within the Samvera stack is known as the Resource Description Framework, or RDF. And I link to the World Wide Web Consortium and their specification in the slides. So from the standpoint, how this is relevant to Samvera is that essentially there's always been a traditional approach to use a project known as Fedora Commons for data persistence within Samvera repository architectures. So essentially, Fedora persists and publishes digital object metadata using this RDF standard, this resource description framework. And from Fedora 4 onwards, which I believe those date to 2018, the Fedora 4 releases implement a standard called a linked data platform, which basically just really further couples the usage of linked data and this Fedora Commons repository project. It should be noted from the standpoint of providing some sort of timeline and basic context that Samvera really originally used Fedora 3 releases, the latest of which was Fedora 3.8.1. Community support ended for that in January 3rd of 2019. And while Samvera repositories typically use Fedora 4 releases, the latest of which was 4.7.5, there's later releases of Fedora Commons 5.1.1 and 6.2.0 are the latest in the series of community releases that one will find. And I would encourage anyone who happens to have any specific questions regarding linked data platforms and the specific technologies underlying Fedora Commons to please seek out persons in the Fedora Commons community. Everything is an open source and project within that organization, and they are extremely helpful contributors, and they're always looking to try and engage with those who are using Fedora software projects. So how this integrates into the actual Samvera repository stack is that basically Samvera, as developers and contributors and interested parties are aware, is really built heavily upon the Ruby on Rails framework. So in order to work with this RDF technology, one really needs to work with an RDF client, which has been implemented in the Ruby software language. And this is where there's a cascade or stack of interdependent gems which support RDF persistence. Firstly, there is this RDF gem, which is maintained outside of the Samvera community. It has an entire dedicated GitHub organization, Ruby RDF, and they publish releases to the RDF gem quite frequently. They are very active, but the contributors are quite small. I wouldn't say that it is a very large community, but they are very engaged. And again, everything is released in such a manner as to welcome contributions and try to promote engagement with their own projects. So RDF itself is actually consumed downstream by a number of different gems that are maintained by the Samvera community. The first of these three are LDP, which requires RDF as a dependency. Active Triples, another gem which requires RDF as a dependency, and this gem Active Fedora, which requires both as dependencies, but really forms the core suite of functionality that is really essential to tying together support for RDF persistence and Rails applications. So here, just to provide a bit more detail, basically RDF can be used to kind of work with in-memory graph parsing of URIs and just modification of these knowledge graphs within the Ruby language. I am not in any way advocating for resourcing the community to maintain this gem. LDP, on the other hand, is used basically as a sort of a low-level client for interfacing with Fedora Commons or Fedora Commons replacements that adhere to this linked data publishing platform standard. I'm humbly suggesting that perhaps this may be superseded by something that's maintained outside of the community, given that it's going to really tether us to looking to kind of work exclusively with Fedora Commons. Active Triples is really providing a level of Rails integration for publishing active record or active model attributes as RDF statements. This is really necessary for maintaining Active Fedora, and for those who are familiar with active record, it's basically kind of provides kind of a certain level of seamless integration so that Rails developers who are comfortable working with active record can work with this readily. And Active Fedora is really fundamental to ensuring that associations or querying or caching are really supported at the level of Rails, much like one finds with really with active record and other active model adapters. Valkyrie, for those who are familiar with this project, it provides an alternative, but the labors for integrating this into the Hierarch stack are still fairly new. So just to qualify a lot of my questions that I've raised so far, and really some of the concerns which I am to some extent voicing, I want to emphasize that I am extremely grateful and indebted to all members of the Samvera community who have authored, contributed, and maintained these core gems. Thank you to everyone. It's really, really fundamental to really to the growth and establishment of Samvera as a repository architecture that can be readily used. However, in order to advance a lot of community efforts over the past number of years from 2019 onwards, it's really important to, I think, engage with the community and contributors in the community, many of whom have shifted their focus to other projects, what exactly can be done to maintain a number of these gems, and seeing about whether or not it's going to be desirable to continue maintaining these gems as they're currently structured. The first question I have, and really the concern I have, is whether or not some of these dependencies should remain decoupled. Is it possible to maybe avoid kind of, segregating LDP and active triples and active Fedora from one another? Might it be more readily useful to try and maintain LDP and active triples within active Fedora? This is an approach that's seen within some of the Hydra core and Hydra head gems. So there have been successes in deduplication there, and perhaps consolidation is going to be helpful. Further, might there be any strong community interest in using RDF following Valkyrie as integration into Hyrax? Would this be for persistence? Perhaps there's less interest in persistence if Valkyrie uses persistence backend, such as PostgreSQL, which doesn't rely upon the RDF, and maybe querying is where RDF support should be offered. And regarding tracking, the activity of Ruby RDF contributors outside of the community, I would strongly contend that engagement should be active with this community of contributors. However, we should not be looking to try and allocate developer time for this. Perhaps even just a small interest group, just to track our releases of Ruby RDF or get a sense for where they would like to take their project in the future might be helpful. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time and attention. Please, all feedback, questions, and definitely criticisms are quite welcome. I can be reached on Slack using my alias, or by email, jrg5@princeton.edu. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, James. And since we do have a little bit longer block, I'm sure if we have a question or two now, we could take it. Otherwise, folks, of course, can still ask questions at the end of the lightning talk block. So feel free to loop back if anybody does have any questions, and I guess we can go ahead and pass it along to Julie Hardesty.
Hello, can you hear me? Is this all right?
Sounds good, Julie.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, is that sharing working?
Looks good.
All right.
Assuming we're supposed to see a GitHub
Yes.
board.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. All right. So yes, this is a live demo, but I'm pretty sure that it's a relatively safe demo to do. We'll see how this goes. All right. So hi, my name is Julie Hardesty. I'm a metadata analyst at Indiana University. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And so I'm going to set a little stage here. So imagine, if you will, that you have pledged maintenance hours to help with Hyrax, and you are joining a Hyrax maintenance working group sprint stand-up Zoom to find out what's going on and what you can work on. So the folks on the Zoom point you to this GitHub project board that we are looking at right here. And this is showing the work that's been lined up for the current sprint. And they show you this test and confirm column here. If you can see where my mouse is pointing here, the test and confirm issue column in the project board. So you're invited to test this first issue, this first one that's hanging out here in the test and confirm issue column. And then so testing this issue, adding a comment to the issue to report your findings. And then if you can, moving the issue along over to the next column, the planning and prioritizing column, so that Rebecca, the Hyrax product owner, can evaluate what needs to happen with that issue and keep things moving along in the sprint. So let's go ahead and give this a try. So this test and confirm column has gathered up issues that we basically are seeing from the backlog and needing to check out and get an update on the status of these, if there's still issues, what sorts of things are happening, and then what the work is that needs to be done. So this issue is It's been titled Search Results, Alternative Layouts, Missing Styling, Gallery, Masonry, and it's got a Bootstrap 4 added onto the title as well. So there's kind of a lot of information there. But we also have a helpful descriptive summary here so we can dig into this a little bit and take a look at what's going on. So what this is describing is that the Hyrax 3.x branches using Bootstrap 4 appear to have missing styling for non-list search result layouts. So that may or may not mean a whole lot to you when you're checking that out. But if we keep going through this, we can see what other information is available and what we can do to actually test and verify what's being reported here. So we've got a rationale that sometimes is useful for getting information here, and then expected behavior. So we've got some expected behavior that when a user clicks on one of these default layouts, the search results should be presented in different ways according to the design pattern for that layout option. So then we've got some screenshots in here, which are really helpful. So we've got a gallery view, and this is showing this expected behavior. So this is showing what it should be looking like. And we can see what gallery view is looking like, which is this option that's been selected in the screenshot. We've got masonry, which is showing this option for the search results that it should look like. And then we've got slideshow, which is showing, this is the last search results option, and this is what it should look like. And we do have some links here. This is going over to NewRax Dev, however, and that's where we're going to be testing. So it's once you head over there, you're actually going to be looking at the site in this. So the links in this case are not necessarily as helpful, but the screenshots are super helpful. So the actual behavior that was reported for this issue, you can see that we've got some screenshots here in addition that are showing the thumbnails are missing. Content blocks are not well delineated from each other. The slideshow option is missing guidance text above the thumbnails. That select an image to start the slideshow is not there. And the modal window is unstyled. So you can see the screenshots that are supplied here for gallery and masonry and slideshow. These different views of the search results are a little different than what is expected. So these first screenshots are showing what's expected with gallery and masonry and slideshow. And then here we're missing thumbnails. I think if you look at this, you can click on these and get a larger view. We don't even have any boxes showing around this. So this is what folks were seeing when this issue was created. And then masonry, we're also missing thumbnails. And then slideshow just really looks totally off here. The thumbnails are kind of cut off. That instruction is missing, like they were saying. All right, and then we've got steps to reproduce the behavior, which is also super helpful. So we've got step-by-step instructions, and this is what we can potentially use to actually go and test this and see what the status is on this issue. So we'll just look at this. So we're going to be going to the home page, hitting go in the search box to produce a large results list. And then in that search results page, we're going to go through those different options of gallery, masonry, and slideshow to see what the layouts look like. And then related work is also listed here. So if there were other related issues, they might be linked up. So then we'll scroll through the rest of this to see what's happened. There's been some things that have happened with like labels being applied, the issue being kind of moved around over time. Looks like there maybe has been some work because there's a couple merged pull requests. So there's been something that's happened with these. Starts work on the view type functionality issues, styles masonry view. So there's been some masonry view work potentially. And then you can see here that we had, it looked like testing was blocked by another issue. And that issue, if you mouse over it, you can get a little preview of it. And you can see with that purple check mark, that's meaning that the issue has been closed. So we had an issue that was blocking, but the issue has been closed. And now there's actually an additional comment that's precisely saying that issue is closed, and we should be able to test this on NewRax Dev now. So getting through all of that and heading back up to these steps to reproduce the behavior, we should be able to try this out on NewRax Dev and see what's happening. So I'm going to open up NewRax Dev, which is our test version of our test deployment of Hyrax using the latest code that's in the main branch of Hyrax. And so this is the active Fedora based Hyrax. And I'm going to follow the instructions to try to reproduce what was being reported as the problems in this issue. So you go to the home page, hit go on the search results box to get research results. So not entering any search terms, conducting a search. We've got our search results here, and this is the default view, which is that list view. You can see here we are seeing results with thumbnails. And then clicking on the non-list options like gallery, Mason, and slideshow to see what these layouts are. So I'm going to scroll back up to where the screenshots that were reported are showing. And so this one is gallery. Switching over to gallery. I am not seeing any thumbnails here. I am seeing, I don't know if you can see this, but I am seeing some lines around the search results. So that seems different than what we saw here. There's no lines here, but we are seeing some lines now, but there's still no thumbnails. And then masonry, this is what masonry was looking like when the issue was created. When we look at masonry now, we're seeing thumbnails. So that seems, and actually we're also seeing some titles on mouse over. So there's some improvement potentially in the masonry view. And that can kind of coincides with what we saw in the issue where there was some a merged pull request for the masonry view. And then slideshow was looking like this. What we're seeing for slideshow now is thumbnails look a little bit better than what these thumbnails are, but that instruction that they talked about being missing, select an image to start the slideshow, that instruction is still not showing up here. So that's what we're seeing for basically for what we currently have in the main branch on Hyrax. That's what we're seeing for search results right now. And I should have shown this a little earlier, but when you scroll down to the footer here, you can see the current version that is that's deployed is the Hyrax 4.0 beta 2. So we've got a particular release, the latest release of Hyrax 4 that we're working on here. And what was originally reported on said it was a Hyrax 3.x branch that had Bootstrap 4. So it's kind of something that was getting updated but hadn't been completely finished. And this was reporting issues from testing on that initial upgrade. And then we've had some work done, but we are seeing some improvements, but we do still have some issues for what we're seeing in the search results. So we don't have any thumbnails here. We are seeing this is masonry is improved and slideshow is better, but still missing instruction text. So I will, the next step here is going to be to report what I found. And I will admit to having pre-typed out. I've got a little bit of pulling this out of the oven pre-baked text to add a comment. So on Nurax dev with Hyrax 4 beta 2, because that's what we just tested on. The gallery view is better. There are boxes around each item, so it's better delineated, but the thumbnails are still missing. So we're still missing some parts of what that view should look like. Masonry view looks better and has all the thumbnails like it was before originally. And then slideshow view seems to have better thumbnails, but it's still missing that select an image to start the slideshow instruction. So that would be my report. And I can add this comment. And so that update for that is there. And then if this is possible, this might depend on if you are added to, you might need to be added to a team on GitHub in order to actually work in the project board to move issues around. But you can either Slack with the team to let them know that that has been tested and you've got a report added. Or if you can move things over, you can actually drag this over into planning and prioritizing column. And that information, we've got the most up-to-date view info on what's happening with that issue. And the Hyrax product owner can then take that and figure out in the priority where that should be, if it's ready to be worked on, if it's ready to be closed, because potentially it's an issue that is no longer a problem and can just be closed out and removed. And what we've done here, actually, I'll head back over here. Yeah, what we've done here is we've shown that we do have some improvements to this issue. It is in better shape, and it is for the Blacklight Bootstrap Rails upgrade work that we're trying to do for Hyrax 4, which is why this label is on there. But for the issues that we're bringing into the sprints for HYRAX, at least, we are trying to lay these things out and show exactly what the issues are that are being that are coming up, and what needs to be done for testing, laying out the steps to test, and being able to have that reported there and provided there, so that folks can come in without needing to do any sort of development work, without needing to do any code work, without needing to have anything up and running locally, and actually use Neurax Dev, the latest deploy, to be able to test and help monitor how these issues are progressing. So this particular example, I think, is one of the easier ones, because it didn't require me to log in at all. I didn't have to be an admin user. I'm not trying to do anything with works on the dashboard. So this was in fact a relatively easy example to use here. But the idea is that we've got issues like this that do need testing. And if you are interested in finding out more about how that works and what other testing we have happening, because this is just one way of doing testing work and participating. We also have feature testing for preparing for releases that I'll be talking about today at 2 o'clock at the Birds of a Feather conversation group 3-4, which is called Community Participation Through Issue Testing in HYRAX. And I will put that schedule link into the Slack here if you are interested in joining up for that. And we'll talk through some more examples of doing this issue testing, what that looks like, and what sorts of things you can do and participate on if you're wanting to help out that way in the community. So I'm going to stop sharing. That's what I had today to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And if we have any questions, I'm sure we can take one or two now. Otherwise, we'll have space at the end of the lightning talks as well. All right, let's go ahead and see what John Cameron has to share.
Share my screen. All right. Hello, everybody. My lightning talk is going to talk about controlled digital lending in Avalon Media System. So first of all, what is controlled digital lending? We just call it CDL because that's a really long name. But the essential thing is just loaning physical items that you own in a digital format. So it's kind of like a lend-like print model. And so there's controlleddigitallending.org, which is kind of like a statement site by a number of institutions that contains a lot of information. It's mostly geared toward text materials. But, you know, essentially the sort of principles of it are you need to own a legal copy of the physical item, maintain the own to loan ratio, aka you can't loan out more digital copies than you own of the physical item. And then, of course, you have to make sure that the digital file is secure, so it can't be redistributed. So you're really ensuring that only one person at a time has access to it, or however many per physical items you have. So we're working with Michigan State University on a project right now, and they approached us, which kind of led to this controlled digital lending functionality. So Michigan State has a large collection of commercial material that is being digitized by the Internet Archive. And I think that process is still ongoing. And so what we're doing is going to set up an AWS-based install of Avalon Media System, help the ingest process with all those things coming from Internet Archive. And then, of course, the final piece is in implementing that controlled digital lending functionality so that MSU can have this Avalon instance where they have, you know, one item to one user access on their Avalon platform. So yeah, just to jump right into the CDL sort of flow in Avalon and how we've implemented it. So here's just an image of just a standard item in an Avalon system. This is our dev environment. So once CDL is enabled, it's basically going currently to be turned on for everything. So if you go to an item and you're an authenticated user, you're going to see something like this, where it's going to prompt you, hey, if you want access to this item, you need to borrow it. And there's this borrow item, which will also tell you how many days that this item can be checked out for. So if I click that orange button to borrow the item, the page will refresh, and then the content will display. So now I can actually stream back the media, and then you'll see on the upper right, sort of nestled above the rest of these panels, there's a time remaining, and then a button to return the item whenever a user wants to. So in addition to sort of like those item page changes, there's also this top level navigation category, checkouts. So this is very much similar to timelines and playlists in terms of having this dashboard where you can see in this table all the things that you currently have checked out, be able to return them just by clicking a button in this list, and then click the media object link to go straight to the item. So also tell you, the exact checkout time and return time. So this is just sort of the standard user view. This next shot, so this is what it would look like as an administrator in the system. So how we currently have designed the CDL functionality is that if you're an admin, you can see all of the checkouts in the system from your dashboard. So in this case, on this dev instance, there's only a couple of items checked out. But you can see one is standard user, which I've represented as Emily, and then our super user archivist one here. So, as the admin, you can go in and return all forcefully. And then there's also this display returned items button that will show you all of the historical checkouts that have happened, not just those that are in the current span of time. So this is enabled right now, sort of in a cascading set. So there are a couple of attributes. One is the system level, settings file, which says, hey, enable or disable this functionality. And currently it's across the application. You can also set a system level lending period. So the lending period is something that then propagates down. So new collections will inherit that lending period. New items created within a collection will inherit the collections lending period. And it's just represented as a day-hour value. So some of the things that we've sort of run across while actually implementing this is, as I mentioned, like initially it's system wide. So you go into the config file, settings.yaml, and enable or disable. But that, in real world usage, it's probably going to be a mix. And that was sort of like probably, just kind of a mistake of trying to get the lightest weight implementation when really collection level enable, disable makes a lot more sense. And especially for, people with large collections, even MSU is like, okay, well, we also want to have other content in here as well. So we're currently working to make it enabled by collection level rather than just having it be locked to a system-wide thing where you need to, go to the settings file, change it, and restart the app. We also initially had a live countdown timer on the page. So it would be like, ticking down the seconds that you had left, which seemed too distracting. So we removed that and just have hours and minutes, which is much more reasonable. So some other things. So this is, tied to the stream authorization that Avalon does, basically to say, hey, streaming server, this person is legit, please hand us the stream. So there's been a lot of work, behind the scenes to make sure that the stream authorization is working. It's expires past the checkout period, and it's really locked to that single user. The other thing we've thought about is notifications, request systems, hold queues. That's out of our current scope right now, although it's certainly something that you see in a lot of CDL implementations. And then the other sort of thing we were pondering is retention of checkout data. So initially, everything here in CDL is stored in the database. And the question was, do we retain that stuff forever? There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to, retain information that's that granular on users in the system and sort of keep it forever. So that's one of the sort of last things we're thinking about as we finish off this functionality. How long do we need to retain that, if at all? So the next steps for controlled digital lending, Avalon 7.5 will be our next release. This will include the CDL functionality. And we're currently thinking about when that is going to be released, hopefully in the next month. As I mentioned, enable, disable per collection is sort of like the big last piece of work. So moving that from that system level to being able to just go into the collection and say, yes, I want CDL on this or that. And then testing across the application. We've done testing in the developments, of the features and functionality. but there are a lot of areas in Avalon. So media embeds, our triple IF generation, is this all sort of in line and working as we would like it? There are a lot of little nooks and crannies in Avalon. And then, of course, continuing just to work on the projects in terms of setting up their cloud instance, configuring it for CDL, seeing how we're going to work on that. And what the improvements can be made to our current, Terraform scripting, making sure everything's updated and sort of current with what's going on there. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Well, we've got a few minutes before our scheduled break time. So if there's any Q&A for John or any of the lightning talks we saw, we've got a few moments for that. I see Rachel's hand up.
Sorry, that was an accidental click.
Put you on the spot there. All right, well, if nobody has anything now, feel free to follow up in Slack. We can start our break now. We will come back at 20 minutes after the hour. So 9:20 Pacific, 12:20 Eastern, 5:20 UK, and I'll see you shortly. Welcome back. I'm showing that it's 20 past. So we can move into our second set of sessions if folks are ready. Next up, we're going to hear from Heather Greer-Klein and Aaron Griffith on It Really Does Take a Village, how the Samvera and Fedora communities are using It Takes a Village project for sustainability planning.
Hey, I am just gonna get our screen sharing going here. Can everybody see? We're good?
Looks good.
Perfect. All right, I'm gonna pass off to Megan actually, and she's gonna kick us off here.
Thanks, Erin. You go ahead and go to the first slide. That would be great. Super. So good afternoon, everybody, or morning, depending on where you are. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Megan Forbes, and I'm the co-director for the It Takes a Village project. So for those of you who aren't familiar, It Takes a Village was initially funded in 2017 by the IMLS to bring together open source programs serving cultural and scientific heritage, to develop shared sustainability strategies, and to provide our communities with the information needed to assess and contribute to the sustainability of the programs they depend on. So sustainability is one of those words that means many different things in many different contexts. So for us within the ITAV framework, sustainability is defined as commitment and resources available at levels sufficient for the software to remain viable and effective as long as it's needed. So the output of the first It Takes a Village project was a guidebook designed to serve as a practical reference source. And then in 2020, IMLS funded a second phase called It Takes a Village in Practice, which created an adaptable set of tools for use in planning and managing sustainability. Next slide, thanks. So the core output from our initial project was not a list of defined characteristics and specific steps to take to become sustainable, right? So instead, we found that programs of all different sizes, funding models, and end user communities could be sustainable. But what they all had in common was that all the sustainable programs that we worked with grew from projects that were direct responses to community needs, rather than, ooh, I've got a good idea, let me go see if anybody is interested. The next thing is that sustainability isn't one thing, right? It's not a straight line. It's not this path that you follow. Rather, it's got facets that move in these phases sort of together and separately. So those core findings turned into the It Takes a Village framework, and I'll share just the 30,000-foot view of that now. Next slide, thanks. So there are many elements that go into open source sustainability, but in the course of It Takes a Village work, most of our participants and contributors coalesced around four main facets. So governance there on the top left, that's about establishing a model in which roles are defined for project participants and support the process for strategic and tactical decision-making in the project. Technology, obviously we're talking about open source software projects, and there are parallels with proprietary software development, but then added challenges because of all the other facets, right? Because of community and governance and resources. Resources, right? We need human and financial resources in order to grow and thrive. And then the final facet is community engagement. And this reflects efforts to foster involvement within a community. So encouraging people to join, to participate, to champion the work that we do. Next slide, thanks. We identified 3 phases of development within each facet. So getting started is generally used for OSS programs that are the early stages of planning, design, and development. Work's often grant funded and kind of focused on fulfilling the terms of that grant. Growing phase, that's going to be the broadest in terms of breadth of range, right? This is, elements of an OSS program can take a long time to grow along a number of pathways. This can be considered the danger zone, right? Programs can stall here or go away entirely if their efforts fail to take root. In this phase, it's really critical to sort of complete that transition from grant-funded or niche project to sustainable program. And then the assessing and evolving phase reflects a more mature program that's reached an established stage. It has those predictable elements, but where stakeholders need to be vigilant because it's easy to sort of be complacent. Hey, we did it, right? and then you don't want to stagnate. You don't want to be replaced by more novel technologies. So continued progress might require shifting back to the beginning. So maybe you're in assessing and evolving, and then you're going to go back to phase one, for example, with your technology, if you decide on a platform re-architecture. Next slide. So when we put those phases and facets together, we get this beautiful wheel. At first I had an animation that actually spun it, but it actually made me a little nauseous. So I took it out, but you can imagine that these phases sort of turn. You can be a phase one in technology, a phase two in governance, right? You're not sort of tied along each of these phases and facets. Next slide. So a lot more information about all of those phases and facets, more definitions, more objectives for how to move forward from one phase to the next can all be found in the It Takes a Village guidebook, of course, freely downloadable and available at itav.lyrasis.org. And then the next slide. And then, as I mentioned, in 2020, IMLS funded a new phase of It Takes a Village work called It Takes a Village in Practice. And that was to create and then pilot a set of tools for practical use. You'll hear that word a lot. It's practically my middle name, in planning and managing sustainability. So in that screenshot at the right, you can see some of the tools that we've developed to support work in phase one of governance. So things like figuring out, why do we even need governance and what type of governance structures are out there? So again, that whole toolkit with probably close to 80 different activities. It's all available online, itav.lyrasis.org. Next slide. And then, so some of you might be thinking, hey, other than Samvera, I'm not working on any open source programs, and they already did It Takes a Village. So how useful is this toolkit for me? So of course, I'm here to tell you it's very useful in a lot of different contexts. So the IMLS funded us to focus on open source programs serving cultural and scientific heritage. So that's what we did. But many of the activities that we developed can be useful for teams who are working on any kind of open source program, working on other kinds of programs, right? We all have programs, they're not all software related, and there's lots of tools that are useful for that. The tools can also be useful for teams that are thinking about implementing open source programs. So even if you're not a member of the program team, you're not on an advisory board, you're not a software developer, there are still activities that can be really useful. So Erin, I'm just going to name 3 real quickly so you can just click through sort of as I name them. So the first one here is catastrophizing, and that's going to help identify like all of the things that can go terribly wrong with your project. It's great to get them out so then you can figure out, you know, can our governance handle this? Do we know who's going to solve the problem? Do we have a mitigation plan? The next one is about understanding financial resource models. So it's a way to have a guided conversation about how can we earn some money to make this program financially sustainable. The last one is documentation friction logging. Have somebody go through your documentation and say how well it works. Were they able to complete a task? Did they get frustrated? Did they throw their computer against the wall, right? And we have documentation for everything, right? Not just software, not just end user stuff, but, you know, how do I reserve a conference room in the library, or all kinds of things that we might have documentation for. So lots of different activities that are useful. And I know we're very short on time, so just very quickly with the next slide. If you are interested in using the toolkit, we've developed some kickoff materials that can help get you started. And so they'll help your program agree on current sustainability status, figure out what your priorities are, how you're going to choose those It Takes a Village activities, and then a checklist to figure out what phase you're in. So Erin, you can just skip the next couple of slides and go right to Heather, who is going to talk about Samvera's experience with the It Takes a Village kickoff and analysis.
Thank you, Megan. All right. So in the Samvera community, over the last year, we've done a number of activities. We applied in, I believe, in early 2021 to be a pilot community for the toolkit. And we were invited to pilot at the end of 2021. And then next slide. So we did our kickoff in April. The kickoff was done with the Samvera board with Megan as a wonderful facilitator and also Lori Arp from Lyrasis. And we discussed those facets that Megan mentioned. We have spent the last several years really focused on governance and community building. So we were really looking at and discussing where the technology and sustainability facets might be relevant. And as a result, we selected, or the board selected, technology as the area of focus for the work we would do piloting the toolkit. So next slide. Yes. And then as we were doing this, because as Erin will shortly share with you, the Fedora community was also piloting the toolkit. We had Rosalind Metz come to the spring partner meeting, and we did a sustainability activity that Fedora had used, and it was really useful. We did a diversifying income streams and adjusting existing revenue streams activities. Learned a lot, talked about it a lot. The board took it from there, and the result was we decided that we learned a lot from the activity, but that this kind of sustainability work really wasn't going to be our focus in 2022, and that it's something that we'll revisit next year and think about. But for now, we're going to sort of not touch our revenue streams. But it was super helpful, and it can be helpful to know and say, hey, we're just not going to focus on this right now. So that was our bonus sustainability activity. And then next slide. So at the June board meeting, the board members voted asynchronously, narrowed down from this great big long list of potential technology activities, voted to narrow it down to 2 activities. We sort of voted on 4 and then narrowed it to 2. It kind of selected the 2 activities, talked about who should be involved and when we should do them. And the next slide, we had our first activity in August. So this activity was called Does the Shoe Still Fit? It was focused on identifying and discussing technology stakeholders. The members of this activity were community technology leaders, so past and present tech leads and product owners and others who were sort of taking the lead in different aspects of Samvera technology. And we were talking across all of the technologies, not just Hyrax or Haiku, but sort of trying to look more broadly and talk about stakeholders, broad stakeholders. So that was a really great activity. We selected 3 stakeholders to focus on, and there were 12 potential goals that came from those for better understanding our stakeholders and their needs, or also addressing needs that we were already aware of, that these stakeholders had already made us aware of. So the next slide. So then we did some refinement. We had all of these goals of these possible stakeholders. So it moved back up to the Samvera board. They discussed and selected the stakeholders to focus on and the goals, and then a small group of board members refined those into 9 goals. So next slide. So of course, we weren't going to be able to take on 9 goals. So we were really trying to focus on what we could do in 2023. So the board discussed and sort of widowed down to the goals we thought were achievable and measurable and something that we could take on for next year. So we discussed those with partners at the fall partner meeting just this month. And the result is our 2023 goals that you see here. So these are the goals that Carolyn talked about in the State of Samvera presentation. So these are 3 things that we have committed to do next year. And it felt really good to get to these through this activity where we were sort of moving from making sure we were able to include a large number of voices and then kind of talk about what was possible, what might be possible later, and saving all of the information that we built up along the way so we can look back at those goals later and say, okay, well, what didn't we do that maybe would still be useful? So it was a hugely useful activity. And the next slide. So our other activity is called the List of Dreams activity. It's where we would brainstorm ideas unconstrained by current features, technology capabilities, funding, any of those usual constraints. We brought together another group, a lot of the same folks who were in the stakeholder activity and also some other folks who weren't able to join that activity. And it was really fun to see everyone brainstorm. And we were thinking across all of the Samvera technologies, but also sort of things that don't currently exist, but that would fit under the Samvera mission. So we're talking about a lot of different technologies. And the idea with this activity is you come up with all of these ideas, you sort of group them together, and then select 4 to further investigate. So it doesn't mean we're going to do these things, but they're things where we might want to start looking now at what technology do we need to do these things, what skills do we need in the community, and so forth. So next slide. So that activity continues today. We have a birds of a feather session where we're going to continue to talk about the 4 ideas and what it would take to investigate them. And it's been a really fun activity. So anyone is welcome to join us in that activity later on today. And some takeaways, it worked out really well for us to spread these activities across the year. It gave us time to get input and refinement at different levels and to move from the board to community members and back as we define these goals. So we're going into next year with these goals ready to go. The activities were excellent. They went really well. And one thing that I noticed was that virtual whiteboards were a huge help in this, and Zoom has recently integrated a virtual whiteboard. So that I think is worth checking out for doing these kinds of activities. Now I'll hand things to Erin.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for setting this up. I think as I'm listening to Heather's part of the presentation, it's really interesting to hear same toolkit, same framework, but different approaches to how we go about it. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown kind of on what the Fedora community did with It Takes a Village. So we started our work in January 2022. We released 6. There wasn't a large feature roadmap. So governance really wanted to sit down and take the time to kind of chart our path forward, but in a really structured and organized way. So we approached lyricists and Megan and Lori about running It Takes a Village, and we decided to undertake this. So the governance chairs at Fedora and myself, we sat down and we had some very concrete timelines about how long we expected this work to take and what we were expecting in terms of participation guidelines. And not as a barrier for participation, we were asking for quite a large time commitment from the folks that we wanted on board, but we wanted to make that very transparent and clear to anybody that was joining us in this activity, because we were essentially strategic planning for the entire community kind of as a path forward. So we made these very clear expectations, and then we formed our strategic planning subcommittee. And so what we did is we sent out an open invitation to all governance members first, which formed kind of the basis of our planning committee. And from there, we made some very targeted outreach to specific individuals within our community in hopes of bringing a broad range of voices to the table. So we needed representation from our sister communities, from Samvera and from Samvera, from Islandora, from OCFL. We also really wanted voices from outside of North America who are typically underrepresented at our decision-making table. And then we also wanted technology folks, so people that were a little bit more deeply familiar with the core software itself. So then we brought the group together, we did the kickoff, and from there we formed 2 smaller working groups from our one large group to tackle 2 facets that we identified in the kickoff. And those were, for us, it was resources and community engagement. And we set our meeting schedule here to kind of tackle those. And then, once the time frame was over, the idea was that we would create a report to present to governance with our recommendations for next steps. So the one resource that we chose was, the one facet that we chose was resources. And we all came at this with the understanding that it meant not only finances, but people and skills. So our Fedora committer team is quite small, very engaged, but quite small, but we were looking for ways to expand this subset of skills and also engagement that's non-technical. So how are we going to involve more parts of the community as part of it? So one of the main goals, though, was to evaluate the current membership model, and explore new avenues for increasing revenue. We did 2 activities with this smaller subgroup. We did diversifying income streams as well, and we also did adjusting existing income streams. So the results of these activities were the creation. We did a landscape analysis of several open source programs and their funding models. We sent out a community survey that was focused on gathering some really basic financial information from our member institutions. And the survey results actually served, many purposes beyond just that, and gave us a really kind of broad understanding of challenges and the needs of our members as it relates to paying for memberships, and the specifics of their processes involved at each institution. So this is background work that we still are working with. It is, we did the legwork in strategic planning, if you will, and we have a lot of useful insight and a lot of important information that we can take away from this. We did, just really quickly to touch on the tools that we worked with, we used Miro for group collaborative brainstorming, which is a free tool that you can use online. We definitely relied heavily on shared Google Docs and spreadsheets for collaborative and asynchronous work. So just you can see in the slide there a couple of the screenshots. And then the other facet that we had was community engagement. So here the goal was to find new and better ways to engage with our current community, and also identify areas where we needed improvement in connecting with those stakeholders. So we did the identifying stakeholder gaps activity. And one thing that we kind of identified early on here is that we do a really good job of communicating with the people who already use and know about Fedora. But what we needed to find out was where we weren't. So if that kind of makes sense, we knew that we did well at talking to people that knew about us, but now how do we get to where we aren't? So, there's this education piece missing that we identified. A lot of people in high level roles at decision-making levels, they really don't know what Fedora is and why it's important. So we needed to use these activities to kind of develop a plan for how to reach them and how to get the information in their hands. So we are in the process of doing that. We created some really clear objectives and clear communication guides, I guess, if you will, and with the help of our organizational home at Lyrasis and the marketing team there, we are in the process of drafting a marketing plan. And really quickly here, I'm going to go through our quick lessons learned. It's been a great tool for us. It's been enlightening and helpful for us thinking to the future. It gave us this structured and organized way of executing this very large and overwhelming concept of strategic planning. That can be very daunting. And It Takes a Village really broke it down into actionable and chunks that we could manage kind of in one sitting. We learned a lot about our views and how we see ourselves as a community and where we foresee the program going. We were able to discuss some things where we didn't align. It's all on the table now so that we can tackle it kind of going forward, so that, as a united front, we can be a little bit more powerful than a fractured one. And so one of my biggest takeaways from this was that sometimes what you think you need isn't actually what you always need. So I was very sure that the only two resources, or the only two facets that we were going to need to focus on, were technology and resources. We didn't have this technology roadmap. We needed funds to continue. But the community spoke, and that wasn't the same thing. But these facets are also interconnected. We were going to touch on those things by tackling these other facets. So that phase analysis really made that very clear, that the group was not as focused as I thought as we would be on technology. We know that 6 is strong, so this was one of our biggest takeaway. And just be patient. Don't rush the work. It will happen. Change doesn't take place overnight. So just be patient with it. So, and I guess we got less than 2 minutes, but Megan, if you want to say one last thing here.
Sure. So if anybody is interested in spending a little more time with It Takes a Village, check out the website. We'll say it's in beta. It's brand new. So if you find something bizarre, let us know. itav.lyrasis.org. And if you end up doing any of the activities, we're still looking for feedback. A lot of them haven't been tested. A lot of them have, by Fedora and Samvera and others, but a lot of them have not been tested. So if you click on any of the pages on the website, you'll see that there's a nice little click here to provide feedback. So if you could just click on that, what's the activity? Who are you? What did you do? What would you change? That would be super. And then if you want to engage Lyrasis, you can always email Lori Arp at Lyrasis if you want somebody to sort of help facilitate any ITAV activities for you or your program.
Thank you, Megan and Erin and Heather. We're going to move quickly because we are actually a couple minutes over, and I will pass it along to Carolyn for her case study, Evolution of Northwestern University Libraries, Repository, and Digital Collections.
Thanks. Let me just share my screen here. Yeah. Okay, can you see that okay?
Looks good.
Great, great. Okay, hi everyone. I'm happy to be here at Connect. I'm Carolyn, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm presenting today from Northwestern University campus, which sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Potawatomi, and the Ottawa. My presentation today is about the work of my department at Northwestern University Libraries. Specifically, I'm going to hone in on our digitized collections workflow. But first, I will discuss a little bit about how we got here. I appreciate you listening to this type of talk. It was really hard to encapsulate all the change we've experienced. Our department just celebrated 7 years on September 1st. Here's our mission statement that we developed together on day one. The Repository and Digital Curation Work Group creates, acquires, describes, and archives digital objects for long-term preservation and develops as well as deploys software to support the discovery, access, and use of digital resources by the members of Northwestern University, scholarly communities, and the public. We have 3 teams of folks dedicated to achieving this mission daily, and they're listed here on the slide. None of this would be possible without them, and I'm acutely aware of that every single day that I come into work. Prior to the formation of this department in the fall of 2015, activities related to digitization, metadata for digitized collections, and repository software development were spread out among 3 different departments and reporting lines. There was an operations group that functioned like a committee for the repository, and it consisted of multiple people from different departments. Northwestern University Libraries recognized that operationalizing work in a committee wasn't making sense anymore. I don't know that it does normally. This organizational approach led to uncoordinated digitization and metadata creation and unfocused development of collection-specific websites using different technologies, as well as no institutional repository to speak of. Repository services was one of the areas that the libraries wanted to strengthen in its large restructuring in 2014 and 2015. So software development, digital collections specialists, and metadata specialists were brought together, resulting in the repository and digital curation. My biased opinion is that the centralization of these skills into one department is one of the fundamental reasons we were able to get where we are now. It allowed us to solve complex issues together, as opposed to having competing priorities like cataloging our print books or developing middleware for our library management systems. Before I discuss the transformation of our digitized collections, I do want to acknowledge that we immediately had to start to work to fill the huge gap of not having a dedicated self-deposit institutional repository on campus. We implemented Sophia, which is now Hyrax, to meet the campus need in 2016. With our research services department owning the campus service, it has filled a gap for the scholars who needed a general repository to share their work. With 4,923 works, we've had a 66% increase in the number of sessions over the past 3 years. So it's being moderately utilized. It is filling that need. Additionally, in 2015, we also immediately knew that we had to sunset our aging books repository. It was created from a grant in 2008. The work was outsourced, so it was called beta because it never reached version 1 and no one knew how to develop it for 7 years. Since we were HathiTrust members, we decided to migrate our digitized books to HathiTrust and continue to send them there to this day, where they can be used alongside Hathi's vast corpus. And lastly, I do need to note that we are very active partners with Indiana University to develop Samvera's Avalon media system until about late 2019, when IU became the institutional home for Avalon after grant funding had dried up. After a very recent migration of our special and archival AV assets into our digital preservation asset management system and digital collections, we now maintain Avalon for our course reserve streaming materials only. And those are digitized in our access services department. Okay, so back to that digitized collections workflow. We were managing a lot of technology from various stages in the library's history, and we knew we weren't being very good stewards of all the digitized content that we had produced as a library over 20 years. In 2014, we had only about 30 terabytes of data managed by our nascent repository applications, and we had over 150 terabytes trapped on file servers that no one really could access. We knew we had hit a tipping point, and we needed a more thoughtful approach for all of the reasons that are listed here on this slide. While we got started honing in on a vision for the online end products that we were going to develop, we knew we had to begin tearing down step one, which was our digitization project's proposal process. We transitioned from an ad hoc submit a proposal anytime process that wasn't based on staff capacity at all to an annual proposal process where the library-wide collections committee prioritizes projects for the year. They weigh preservation concerns, whether a collection will be used by a course or for research, and whether it advances a strategic priority like a campus-wide exhibit. And that's all based on the staff capacity in terms of digitization, metadata, and project management time. Here's our annual project cycle that is listed. These changes have led to an increased activity and productivity with our in-house digitization of collection image materials like photographs and documents and negatives, and our AV materials, along with our metadata creation. With a focus on making our library collections discoverable, it has been easy to see an upward trajectory in the usage analytics of our products, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. While we were hard at work ramping up our skills in digitization and metadata and creating sustainable portfolio management processes for our digitization projects, we defined some basic tenets for the next generation of our repository landscape, and they are listed here on the slide. At this time, Northwestern University as a whole entered a campus agreement with Amazon Web Services, and we knew we had an opportunity to take a risk to move the repository to the cloud. And some of you may have heard about these risks, successes, and failures over the past few years at Samvera Connects like these and the virtual Connects in the spring. It's really hard to summarize all of the work that took place to realize this next generation repository. So here's a rough timeline of different milestones. Moving to the cloud, which was risky, did give us an opportunity to rethink everything. There's so many opportunities for improvements by using the ecosystem that the cloud provides. We started to look for components to break out and utilize provided services. After moving Avalon and our self-deposit IR, which is IRX, to the cloud, we learned a lot, and we began implementing our first ever digital preservation asset management system and launched our separate front end for digital collections, which goes back to that basic tenet where we did want to separate our front end from our back end concerns. Okay, so after that first digital preservation asset management system was launched, which was in the fall of 2018, it was Hyrax. And then we began listening to our internal users and their needs. It's almost as if we gave them a door and they started walking through the door, and all of a sudden they wanted to walk through more doors. So we had customized Hyrax beyond upgrading. And so we knew that in order to respond to the needs of our users, we had to go greenfield. This freed us up from design workflows. This freed us up redesigning workflows for digital collection management without the constraints of using a pre-existing technology. We wanted the work to be the work and not the workaround, as someone in my department likes to say. We call our new digital preservation management system Meadow, and we presented on it here before. It's been over a year in production, and we are now on version 7. That is the pace by which we move forward now. We respond swiftly to new needs and continually release. Since our digital collections front end is already 3 years old, we are hard, and it does look it, we are hard at work at versioning our API, and we'll be launching a new API soon with a new front end. I will say there has been a cultural shift in how we thought about contributing back to the community. during this time because we know we value open source software and we value Samvera a whole lot. So we've prioritized contributing standards-based components to Samvera, such as our IIIF serverless server, our IIIF viewer. We've also paired with other Samvera institutions to share knowledge around different programming languages like Elixir. And we also prioritize contributions to working groups, like when we had people in the redesigning the Samvera.org website working group. And I think Adam presented on that earlier. So I keep mentioning like getting here. So what is here? I'm finally going to kind of describe the workflow end to end with an example. In 2020, the curator for our transportation library proposed a project to digitize early US bicycle and bicycle parts manufacturers' catalogs from the period of 1890 to 1932. The 72 works in this collection represent over 40 manufacturers, roughly geographically dispersed in equal parts from the Chicago area to the East Coast and the Midwest. The project was considered to be of strategic importance. And because of that proposal process, we knew from the outset that the collection was around 900 pages. It would take us about 150 hours to digitize. We knew that marked records existed, so our metadata coordinator could transform those records and mint URLs for linked data compliance in probably about a week of time. And we also knew that project management for a smaller collection like this was probably about 20 hours of time. So our collections committee weighed that along with all the other proposals and decided that it would be good to prioritize this to be worked on in the 2021 academic year. So Meadow, after we digitized it, Meadow allows us to easily batch upload using an inventory spreadsheet, which our digitization staff now do. Within minutes, the staff can see all of the works ingested into Meadow, kind of like you see here on the screenshot. Speed of ingestion was a primary problem that we solved when we wanted to when we were designing the system. Preservation of assets immediately also was something we wanted to solve. So as soon as the files are uploaded and that minimum administrative metadata is applied from the inventory spreadsheet, all the files are moved and critical preservation tasks are executed. We have an audit trail that's immediately created, and all of those derivatives are created as well, like our pyramidal tips, or now we have AV in here, so it's streaming AV. I want to briefly mention, we do believe this has had an effect on our digitization staff. The fact that they can see the fruits of their labor immediately in the system and know that it's going to get used has been really great for morale. Before, they would digitize things, and like I said, they'd be trapped on a server after we delivered the files somehow to whoever was requesting them. The project manager then applies more administrative metadata so that any staff in the libraries can log in and look through the collection before the collection's descriptive metadata is applied and before the collection is actually published. You can see some of the administrative metadata here. It's been really helpful for me to execute searches from a page like this, where I can like look at all of the, for example, 2020 projects just by clicking 2020. I also want to reiterate how critical this redesigned workflow is in managing risk for the organization. We have now eliminated what we call the danger zone. Our digitized files, which take a lot of time and energy to create, don't sit for years anymore trapped without any management except being on a file server and without any of our constituents being able to reuse them. Here's a screenshot of that preservation tab that I was mentioning, where I can see the verification of the file set. I can view checksums. I can also see all the technical metadata. So once the collection has been ingested, we can easily batch edit metadata. This has brought a whole new level of joy to working and managing collections. I personally feel like we've met the mark here, especially when our metadata coordinator is so happy with how fast the system is. This comes from the fact that our nascent repository back in 2015 required one-by-one editing of flat works. So there were no complex works. You couldn't bring in metadata from any other system. It was a very slow and grueling process. So this bicycle catalog collection, most of it is publicly accessible on our digital collections, but there is one work that we had to keep private. Curators and staff, though, can log in and share the link to this work with a researcher who will see it in our digital collections front end like this until the link expires. You can see sort of in the screenshot, I don't know how well you can read this, but it does give the little like yellow bar that, you know, the link's going to expire and, you know, all of our copyright stuff. So this self-service model to share a work out managed by the repository has also helped the organization remove its risky practice of creating what we would call shadow repositories. So basically, once we shared files with requesters, people would put them on things like Box or in other systems to, you know, keep referring back to them, but they weren't really managed by a centralized place. So this really has helped us remove that risk of having those shadow repositories. I know we have succeeded in building a platform that people use because we've gotten notes from staff about, wow, this is awesome. Like, can you help us find this thing? We were searching for it. We know you digitized it. So we do have people coming to us when we know they're using it. This self-service model for our digital collections is what was dreamt of for years. And I'm not prioritizing necessarily the software here. I also think all of this work really took people to understand and think about how to redesign work, how to talking about systems, how to train people, how to reach out to people across the organization, how to build a service and program around our digital collections. So remember when I talked about our 30 terabytes that that was the only thing that was managed by our repository, and we had 150 terabytes trapped on a file server. So here's a rough estimate of now in terms of what is stored and managed. Meadow and the new digital collections workflow also allowed us to rethink storage. We now have working files that are stored locally. As soon as they're ingested, we package up a copy and send it off to Glacier. We then have our preservation files managed by the repository, as well as all the derivatives. So all in all, we have 9 copies of preservation style files stored in different regions. We have made huge leaps in the management of our risk. And we can also see analytics right within the UI of our Meadow. We prioritize designing analytics to report at the collection level rather than views of individual works, which is what you mainly see in traditional self-deposit IRs. We knew we needed this for our curators to be able to understand how their collections are being used. Imperfect as it may be in demonstrating impact, staff can at least log in and see immediately and know that the bicycle catalog collection was accessed via 700 sessions spread among 264 cities over that a little more than a year period. Our hope is that curators and other collections staff use this data to start to inform their own work and to start to inform the proposal process. And all in all, over the past, we report out annually, our fiscal year is from September 1st to the end of August. So we saw an 80% increase in sessions for our digital collections site as a whole, with more than 90,000 of them accessed globally from more than 9,000 cities. So now we are able to ingest and preserve as we digitize and make them available as needed, even before our full metadata is applied. Last year, we ingested almost as many works as we digitized. We are now in a nice cadence for our digital collections workflow. And digital collections is now seen as integral to how the libraries support Northwestern's mission of providing an academic environment that is impactful and of producing top-tier research, new knowledge, and creative expression. So, thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm sure Carolyn would love to take any questions in Slack. And just to get back on schedule a little bit, we're going to move on with Kai Stroud and the software development process.
All right. Can everybody see my presentation?
Looks good.
Great, thanks. Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about the software development process and specifically talking about the role that developers play in the Samvera community. So quickly, a little bit about me. My name is Kai Stroud. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a senior software engineer at softservebyscientist.com, formerly known as NotJate. I've been a developer now for just over 4 years and have been working in the Samvera community for almost as long. So a quick overview of my presentation, what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be discussing the development process from an individual developer's perspective, as well as then expanding the scope out a bit to talk about how contributions happen in the community, the Samvera community specifically. So first, the development process. This is going to be a brief peek into our day-to-day. And it is worth mentioning that I will mostly be pulling from my perspective as a developer at SoftServe. I know that many of my peers have similar processes, so there is likely some overlap. But like I said, it's just worth mentioning. I think that this is coming from my specific perspective and our processes mostly. So at SoftServe specifically, we use an agile Scrum process. This is a combination of 2 different project management methodologies. Both are very complex and there's a lot of information about both of them, so I'm not going to be diving into that. The main thing worth noting is that it is a project management system that relies on incremental development. And what that means is that it mostly focuses on iteration and delivery. So we work in 2-week intervals called sprints, and the goal of each sprint is to build the most important features and fix the most important bugs first. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, we come out with a potentially deliverable product. So yeah, again, a series of bug fixes, parts of a new feature, or maybe a whole new feature itself. It is really focused on small actionable goals that lead to real results quickly. So we start with a product backlog. This is all of the issues and features for a specific product. And then in the planning leading up to the sprint, that backlog is filtered down into a small set. Again, almost always prioritized by the most important bug fixes and features. Then the 2-week sprint begins. Sprints are usually worked on by a small set of developers, at least, again, in my experience, usually somewhere between 3 to 5 or 6 maybe developers all working on the same batch of issues in that sprint. And then at the end of the sprint, there is, if the sprint was successful in finishing, getting certain things ready to be delivered, then that gets packaged into a new release for the software, and then that gets pushed out to all of the users. So we organize our tasks using something called issue boards. If you saw Julie Hardisty's lightning talk earlier today, this will look familiar. I'm actually, I'm really glad that she gave that talk because I think it adds a lot of context to parts of what I'm going to be talking about. So this is a board with different columns. The individual items in each column are called issues or tickets. They refer to an individual task, either one bug fix or a feature, or maybe one specific piece of a large feature. Typically, these issues move from left to right across the board as work gets done. And they're tracked that way by project managers, developers. And these boards are also not strictly for developers. At SoftServe, we often collaborate with our clients on boards like these. And also, Julie mentioned how the community can participate in reporting issues and working on these boards, even if they are not developers. And these are pretty common. If you report a bug on any app or website, etc., really any kind of software, it'll probably end up on a board like this for whatever company or community is working on that piece of software. So each ticket contains a few things. This is the template that we use at SoftServe. So each of our tickets has a summary of the bug or the feature. a list of acceptance criteria to really nail down what needs to be done in order to consider the task as completed. Screenshots, videos, or wireframes, really just supportive media to help describe the ticket itself. And then also testing instructions of either how to replicate the bug or verify that the feature covers all the bases it's supposed to and does what it's supposed to. Like I said, this is the specific template we use at SoftServe. There are other templates, and a lot of them often have similar elements. So again, like Julie went over earlier today, Hyrax, the template that Hyrax uses is a descriptive summary, a rationale, expected behavior, actual behavior, steps to reproduce the behavior, and then also related work. And then not explicitly mentioned on my slide here, tickets often also have references to related tasks or code, and then also comments for discussion. Here's a simplified version of a typical development cycle. Most of these bubbles have different steps within them, but just keeping kind of a high level overview here. Starting at the top, we start with a request. So the request comes in from a user or another developer who found a bug. The request is investigated, and if it is found to be valid, then an issue is created on the issue board. And then that issue or ticket goes through a triage process, again, usually as part of a sprint planning meeting to give it a priority in relation to the rest of the backlog. After that, then development starts on the ticket. This is all the code changes that happens. And then once the developer finishes the code that they're writing, it goes through code review. This is when another developer reads through the code to make sure that there aren't any errors or potential bugs or anything like that, a quality control step. And then there's the quality assurance step. This happens typically, again, pulling from SoftServe, we use something called staging sites. These are often private sites that are on the web that we deploy code to for testing purposes. So like I said, they're not typically available to the public, and then our clients would go in and use that as a playground for testing to make sure that the feature that they've requested is doing what it needs to do and behaves as expected. And then also for developers or specific QA engineers to go in and test to make sure that there aren't any bugs. If the code passes the QA step, then it gets deployed to the live site. So this is the actual website that users use. And then this is when the feature or bug fix becomes available to everyone using the site. And then after the deploy step, there's again, a verification step within that to make sure that everything looks okay after the deployment. And then comes maintenance. So maintenance can cover a lot of things. Often this includes security updates to software that the application relies on. It could be bringing upgrades from the code base that the project is based off of. So if you have a Hyrax application, Hyrax is obviously always being developed on and new versions are being released. Your application doesn't automatically stay up to date with those. And so bringing in those updates could be part of maintenance. And then also new bug fixes and new features. And then that leads back into the request step. So far, mostly been focusing on what an individual developer's day-to-day might look like, but now I'm going to be talking about how that plays into the rest of an open source community like Samvera. So quickly touching on open source, I'm sure most people listening to this talk know what open source is, but in case anyone doesn't, I'll just quickly go through the what and why of open source. So basically, it's the opposite of proprietary, proprietary being software that you pay for and is private. It's usually offered by a specific company for profit. There are many benefits to open source. One is that it's public. Anyone can go and look at the code. It is community driven. So again, the software is not being pushed forward by a single company's interests. Many eyes on the same code creates trust between the community. Lots of different people from different backgrounds going in and collaborating helps to catch a lot more issues before they make it to the production site, and really makes solid software in that regard. And then also the fact that anyone can contribute to open source software. So you have the power to make the changes that you want to see in the product. How contributions happen specifically with code. Usually, again, with the Hyrax application or maybe a Haiku application, you would branch off of the main community code base in something called a fork. It's your own copy of that code base. In that copy, you can do feature development, make bug fixes. You can also make any customizations you want to. And then for generally applicable changes that you make, so again, if you fix some bugs or added a cool new feature, you can then merge that code back into the community code so that everyone else has access to it. And it's really neat though, because any specific customizations that don't apply to everyone else, like if you change the name of the application to be your institution's name, you just don't contribute that back so that everyone else can use their own name. So if you take this and you put it at scale, you have many institutions all making contributions at the same time into the Samvera tech stack. And then as that happens, those improvements, bug fixes, and new features get put back into each of the institutions' code. And this way, everyone benefits from using open source software like this. And again, with many institutions doing this kind of work, this multiplies the number and the speed of improvements that happen. So that's a quick overview of what the development process looks like. You can reach me on Slack using my handle or by email. And if we have time, I will take questions.
We do have time. So if there are questions for any of the last block of presentations, feel free to send those through now. Well, it's looking like we can go ahead and move on. And I'll pass it to Heather in just a moment. I just want to say thanks for joining today, myself. And these conferences are successful only through participation. So as you look ahead to calls for proposals for Virtual Connect in next spring, no dates yet, think about some of the things you saw this week and your comments on them. And we'd love to get some talks and lightning talks set up for that conference. And I'll pass it to Heather. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I just have some quick closing remarks to close us out today. First of all, thank you again to the 2022 Planning Committee. They worked really hard this year, first starting to plan for an in-person conference and then changing gears and bringing us back to the virtual conference that we've enjoyed this week. We couldn't do these events without a planning committee, so thank you all again. Just wanted to share again that videos will be on the Samvera YouTube channel. The full videos of the last 3 days are there. We'll get today up probably by this evening, and then next week you'll see individual videos for sessions. There's a conference wiki page. If you go to wiki.samvera.org, that's going to take you to the Samvera Confluence wiki. That's where most of our sort of community-focused documentation and information lives. And there's a conference wiki page that has all of the presentations listed, and presenters are going to share their slides, and then that's where we'll put the video links as well once they're ready. And I'll send that out to all attendees sometime next week. So keep eyes open for that. Our next event is a developer congress at the end of January. There's a link on the Samvera wiki for that as well. Please sign up and share your topics. Developer congresses, we know we'll be working on likely some Hyrax Valkyrization work, but at developer congresses, there's always an opportunity to present other topics and activities you'd like to take on. And looking further out, as Kevin said, we've got Samvera Virtual Connect. So start thinking about what you might want to present. We will have virtual developer congresses throughout the year. So keep an eye out for those as well. The first one being in January, but we'll have them periodically throughout 2023. We're hoping to have an in-person developer congress, and we're looking for a host for that. So if you're interested, get in touch with me. We'd like to plan that. And we're hoping to have Samvera Connect in person next October. And we'll have more information about that and potential hosting locations early next year. I also want to make sure to mention that the Technology Maintenance Hours Pledge Drive for 2023 is live. We have a goal of 4,000 hours of technical maintenance pledged. This can be documentation, training, and development work. And we would like to see at least 15 different organizations pledging. That's our goal. Please keep in touch with us after Connect. We've got the bit.ly there will take you to the Getting Started with Samvera wiki page. There you can find a list of all of our regular calls, access to the Slack channel if you haven't been in the Slack channel already, our email lists, and all the other ways you can get in touch with folks. Our Birds of a Feather groups are coming up right after I finish here. And we'll have 2 different groups of sessions. You can check those in Sched, or they should have just automatically popped up in the Connect Samvera channel for easy access. So as we're wrapping up Connect, I want to thank our speakers and our discussion facilitators for giving us a reason to be here together this week. Julie Hardesty did an excellent job earlier in the week recognizing and articulating how challenging and draining our lives have been in the last 2 years and continue to be, with great uncertainty and cruelty in the wider world and a great deal of turnover and challenge in many of our workplaces. And it takes time and energy to put together an informative session, and all of you are wonderful. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experiences with us this week. I want to thank the whole community for showing up for each other over this last year with such kindness and patience and support. I'm really, really looking forward to what we do next. So if I don't see you at a Birds of a Feather conversation, have a great rest of your week.